All right, now that you have your community in place, there's some important literature or documents that you need to have set up. Especially as your community starts to scale, it becomes difficult for you to interact one-on-one with every new member that comes in. So some of the important documents, number one is your mission statement, your community mission statement, and the other are your community guidelines. Okay, so let's quickly go over what these are. Awesome. So what's your community mission statement? 3 things: who, what, and why. So your mission statement should outline the purpose, goal, and scope of your community. Who have you created this community for, right? The second one is, what do people talk about in this community? What is that common bond that all of the community members share? Obviously, the third one is, why have you even created this community? So that's the goal of the community, the purpose. Now, you can use this mission statement externally when you're, in your ad descriptions, in your landing pages, to show other people, to show a cold audience what your community is about. But it's also important internally within your team, so that, to make sure that all your goals are aligned. Another important document is that of your community guidelines. Now, what's the difference between a community guideline and your just say rules? You need to understand that community guidelines are not necessarily just rules. For a rule, right, in rules what happens is you say, okay, this is allowed, this is not allowed, this is allowed, this is not allowed, right? It's more of do this, don't do that, do's and don'ts. Whereas in your community guidelines, that's not what you're doing. You're not telling them don't do that or do this. You're telling them, hey, most of the members here, or the members like me and you, what we do here is this and this, right? So this is the kind of environment that we have created. So it's less policing and it's more giving them a healthy environment or showing them the way rather than just telling them what to do. You practice what you preach. And now that you've talked about community guidelines, it also makes sense for us to talk about moderation. Moderation is extremely, extremely important in communities. I told you earlier, adding friction in community is very important, because one bad apple and your entire bunch goes to rot. So moderating is, however, not about policing the community. It's about creating a safe place for discussion. There's 2 types of moderation. One is reactive moderation, when a certain issue happens, or when there's spam, or there's a troll that's attacking your platform, or there's a raid. Removing all of that, that is you're reacting to a certain issue. That's reactive moderation. There's also the concept of proactive moderation. Now, proactive moderation, like we mentioned, is creating those strong guidelines, making sure that those guidelines and what's described in those docs are not just pieces of paper, but you're actually implementing them and enforcing them. You're leading by example. You're practicing what you preach. You're also going to be transparent. You're going to be making sure that, okay, I'm not an evil community. I'm not an evil community manager. I take my decisions based on logic. They're objective and not necessarily subjective. You also manage social density, right? We spoke about what social density is and what can happen at scale. When more and more messages come, when there's a lot more activity, you need to know how to manage this. For example, for Reddit, it was creating subreddits and having individual moderators take up each of those subreddits. You also have to, show yourself that you are an authority. Contrary to popular belief, even in communities, there is an important authoritative or leadership figure. It can be one person, it can be an entire community council. Your admins, they call you administrators or moderators. They are your authority figures, right? And they are there to show you and lead by example. You also show positive reinforcement. Do you guys know what positive reinforcement is? So it's a concept by Skinner. He outlined 4 things. One is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishments, and omissions. So negative, punishments, and omissions, basically they all have a negative connotation, whereas positive reinforcement, in simple terms, if you're doing something good, give them a pat on the back. Cool? And tell them, continue, appreciate, encourage. And finally, how do you react to situations? That doesn't happen once the situation occurs. You need to have a set process in place, an action plan on, if say a bad situation happens, how do we react to that? Now, how do you react to a conflict? Now, set up a conflict resolution plan. Now, in this conflict resolution plan, you need to have a set number of processes or set number of questions. It's like an algorithm. So you can ask questions like, okay, this conflict that occurred, was it on a topic for your community? Was it related to your community? Does it make sense? Was it a difference of opinion within a topic that caters to the kind of overall discussion that happens in your community? If not, throw it, because your community is for a specific purpose, and unrelated conflicts simply distract from the purpose of the community and the conversation. Next up, who is bringing up the conflict? Is it someone new? Is it someone who does not know about how to deal or how to behave in this community? Now, the way you treat this person, the way you resolve that conflict is extremely different, say, from a veteran, right, who's an old member and he knows that the certain rules that actually happen here. Could it be someone who is just malicious and wants to do it just to disrupt the overall environment of the community? Are they trolls or are they potential trolls? In that case, you may just want to ban them. Now, next, more less about people but more about the actual topic. Was this a controversial topic? How do you handle controversial topics? If it's a controversial, divisive topic, say sometimes about religion and politics, and if you don't have a specific place, like generally what most people do is they try to keep some form of content away from scopes of discussion, like religion and politics, because they tend to be divisive. But if that is allowed in your community and there's no problem, make sure that you facilitate and moderate these discussions. Don't just remove it just yet, because people are all kinds of people, right? Everyone, they think different. Some people might actually like having political discussions or religious discussions. Just saying that, hey, we don't have any kinds of discussions like this, it's not, maybe they might be like, hey, now you are probably showing a tough hand. Next is this kind of conversation. How is the person speaking? How is the language? Is it combative? Is it offending people? If so, maybe you want to throw it out. Or just because they are aggressive in their speech, it could be also because of passion. So you need to understand those nuances. Are they actually trying to offend people, or are they just passionate about what they're speaking about? Finally, is this conflict specific or between specific community members? If it is between two parties, generally what you want to do is take it outside the platform, not from the public. I mean, the more you open such discussions to the public, the lesser it helps. So it always makes sense, if this is a conflict between two specific members, take them to a separate, give them their own space and resolve the conflict there. Now, one of the most important things, especially when you're resolving conflict or getting some form of feedback, is how you do this, right? Now, let's talk about the conflict resolution plan or the customer service plan. Now, moving on from the conflict resolution, there are also situations where your customers simply want some form of support or some form of help. Now, here there is something called as the 3-step social customer service or customer care plan. And it starts with, number 1, you respond quickly. Especially in the internet time, it's not like someone who goes to an offline business. You say, go to a bank and you're like, hey, I have an issue. And then the bank tells, okay, come back after 2 days. Now, that's not the way it works. In internet, everything is 24/7. Everything is all the time live. So internet time is not like real time. Even if you're busy, you need to respond quickly, at least with that, you have been heard. And that needs to happen within 12 hours. And the final resolution needs to be done within 24 hours. That's the ideal situation. Now, when you're interacting with them, show some form of empathy. Show them that you understand the situation at hand. You really need to take off your shoes if you want to step into that other person's shoes and understand what the problem is. And finally, if you can, always move it to a private channel, either through a private message or refer them to your customer service team. If they're reaching the community management team and they're like, hey, I have this particular issue, tell them, okay, please email us at this, or get on a call. Avoid these public backs and forth, because that, when there are too many people looking at things can get escalated really quickly. Small things get into, out of context. So avoid, as much as possible public escalation. And the final thing about customer support is the difference between empathy and sympathy. And just check out some of these examples in the wording. An empathetic statement can be something like, hey, when someone reaches out, they're like, I can certainly understand why this would be frustrating. Because you're literally stepping into that person's shoes, you're understanding, okay, why this issue happened and how you would feel if that issue would happen to you yourself. Whereas a sympathetic statement, it may not be offending, but it can come across like you're like a third person and you're not actually stepping into the person's shoes. You're there and you're like, hey, I'm sorry that you're facing this. I don't completely understand, but I'm still sorry that I know that you're facing this issue and it's kind of frustrating, but yeah. So that's a sympathetic statement. What you want to aim for is something that's more empathetic. Another example, I can definitely understand your need for this particular thing, or I know how important for you it is to be able to do so and so. Empathetic statements align yourself with your member, and this can help de-escalate touching situations. Rather than being, sometimes patronizing or, looking at it from a different perspective and giving your opinions, that's not what people want. They want you to feel what they were feeling.